we waste so much energy not making decisions. Like we think about things, we ruminate, we're like, oh, what if I do this? What if I do that? And then we're exhausted. And then we actually never graduate our problems. Or we'll think we'll make a decision and go back around in a circle. And so one of the reasons why I study decision science is how can we quicker or more quickly get to a yes or no?
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day, and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Dan Storey. Dan is an author, trainer, and motivational speaker who has spent years studying the principles of personal motivation and behavioral psychology to answer two simple questions. Why do we do what we do? And can we influence this? As a master practitioner and trainer of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and with a master's degree in behavioral decision sciences, Dan truly understands the mental processes it takes to be successful in transforming the results you get in life. Through becoming one of the top natural physique bodybuilders in the world and competing at the Natural Olympia, Dan has put these principles into action to show what it is possible when you put your mind to it. Dan has made it his mission to help people unleash their true potential and live life at a level they only dreamed possible. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Dan. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Thanks, Dwight. Thanks for having me. And I listened to that intro. I think, oh, this guy's going to be interesting. Then I realize it's me. And then I hope I can live up to the hype. So I'm excited to be here, have a great conversation about, I don't know, all things psychology, mindset, and figuring out how we get out of this, the most out of this life, I think.
Yeah, and get off the what I always talk about and coach about getting off the hamster wheel of life. We
Yep.
don't have to be that person. We don't have to strive to say, I just want to be normal like everybody else. I raise my children and I coach. I'd rather be Abby normal. I'd rather
Yep.
be that difference maker. I'd rather be the person that's living outside of my comfort zone. Normal means comfort. And I'm not saying to anybody listening that that's bad. I want more. And hopefully
Yep.
you do, right? And I know I would mention to you before we hit record, I bring on guests that excite me. I go through 8, 10 requests minimum just from one service a week. The other one I get over 30 and I read through them and I have to have that, I really want to talk to this person, right? I really want to learn from them. And then hopefully my, you know, listeners want to as well and viewers on YouTube, right?
I'm sure we're going to cover some really good ideas. I'm going to, like you said, it's going to be a good conversation. We're going to challenge some ideas, some status quo, get people trying to think differently. Because I think that's the point, right? Is we're conditioned to think in a particular way, and that doesn't always get us what we want out of life. So we need to
Yeah.
start thinking differently a little bit.
It's hard to break out of conditional programming, as we talked about a little bit before recording. Our learned behaviors don't come from just our parents either. They come from society. They come from everything we watch, read, our aunts, uncles, our influences, a coach in a sport we're in, a teacher we favor, and they just influence us. Just these little micro influences, and we get to a point in life that we become camped. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted you on. I wanted people to have something that they maybe haven't had in a long time, and that's belief and hope for a future that then have faith that they can find great people like you to help them or me or whatever the case may be that they don't have to stay camped. They don't
Yeah.
have to go back and forth, work, go to work, go home, get paid, and live in that proverbial rut where that rut becomes their grave eventually, right? I
Yeah.
honestly believe that we need to have great people like yourself being a life like, game changer, right? A world changer. So we're going to get started here. Dan, one of the things I focus on initially before we get into in depth of questions and conversation is your origin story. And I'm not talking about the fluff from when you finished, grade school. I'm
Yeah.
talking about the real meat of things that happen and influence you throughout your life. Like maybe you were 6, 7 years old, and now looking back, you can go, wow, that was a difference maker in my life. I seen my parents do this. I seen somebody else do that. Again, it doesn't have to be bad. It's good, bad, and ugly. It could be
Yep.
sometimes they're people's origin. They just had this epiphany from somebody, or they had a grandparent support them. I just want people to be able to better relate to you. It makes it easier for them to connect as we continue on with our conversation. So, Dan, please tell me your origin story. What key things from your childhood to adulthood that led you to where you're at currently?
It's funny. I'm literally writing a new book, and one of the chapters is origin story, and kind of looking back at some of the things that have gone on, and actually taking the lessons from those points, right? Because if you think about superhero, the origin story, and take Wolverine as one of the most recent ones, is you see all the bad stuff that happens, and this is like the pre-superhero phase, and you're just like, this guy is a nobody. They're ordinary. They have typically character flaws and things that make think this person is never going to be a hero, and then they come out the other side of that, hopefully, with some kind of ability to influence the world. So I love this concept of origin story. Mine's very ordinary. It's quite interesting. I grew up in kind of fairly rural England. I remember the school that I went to had 47 people in total. That was including kind of 7 years of students, all the teachers, and probably the caretakers and stuff like that. So I kind of grew up in rural England. I did make it to London. I made it to the big city. I sound like Dick Whittington or something along those lines. Um, but it kind of growing up, I was, I had a good family. My parents divorced, and that's kind of something that, I've been thinking about a lot lately, is that, we have these childhood traumas. And although the divorce, there was nothing bad that happened. They both remarried, both stayed married again for 40 plus years. And so I've seen through that actually kind of second chances and how that actually works out a lot better. And there may be a lot of pressure on these kind of divorce situations, but actually for individuals involved, it can work out extremely well. I was good at school. I was kind of lucky academically. I say lucky. I put in the work. I kind of had opportunities, but I put in the work as well. I enjoyed playing sport and kind of followed that. But one of the things you talked about is, we're a bit compliant. We grow up, and here's one of the funny things. So I went to university. My first time at university, I did because I've been back a couple of times. Just keep learning stuff as much as possible. I did sports science and maths. So in theory, I'm really good at counting press ups, right? But they're quite different elements, right? I really love the physical body. We'll talk a bit about bodybuilding and how important that is. But I've played sport my entire life at a fairly decent level. But I'm also a little bit of a nerd, and the maths thing is a thing. I play Dungeons and Dragons now, so that's the thing. So I kind of have these kind of two wolves inside of me, the jock and the geek. They're both kind of competing. And I remember not enjoying maths. This is the thing, and I remember having this conversation. My mum tells it differently, but I didn't want to carry on studying maths. And I remember having this conversation with my mum. I spoke to university. They said, "Yeah, you can go on and do sport." And I sat with my mum down. I said, "Hey, look, I don't want to do maths." So she sat down and cried. And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "You need to have something proper, something that you can fall back on." And I remember this as a conversation at like 19 years old, something like that. And having that conversation and the emotional pressure I felt from my mum, I carried on doing maths. Now I'm grateful for having done it, but that's one of the very early chances or very, very early things that I've noticed that we comply or we can be emotionally kind of steered in certain directions and stuff. And had I followed my own path, like everything would have been different. But it's interesting, right? So I have this kind of sports background and maths background. I went back to university to really kind of challenge myself from an athletic studies perspective, went back to do a master's. And at that point, I was saying just in our warm up, a friend of mine gave me a CD and it was a personal development CD. He said, "Hey, listen to this. I think it's going to be interesting for you." And at the time, I was working with athletes and fitness people, trying to get them fitter and stronger and healthier. And this was all about mindset. I was like, "Wow, like how do I do this?" And literally in an instant, my career changed. Like no longer did I want to work on the fitness side. I was all about the brain. I ended up studying, like you said, neurolinguistic programming, going and trying to understand the psychology, why we do what we do. How do we communicate? How does our brain communicate? How do we think? Um, that kind of took me into business. I ended up working with salespeople for about 20 years, teaching them these principles of thinking and communication and why we make decisions the way we do and how our values align or contrast or and how we play to those and how we tie our kind of products and services to values and make it seem appealing to people. I went back to university to study psychology even further because, I'm constantly chasing that little certificate that says you're good enough. Um, so I have a master's degree in behavioral science, which, looks at not just the brain and how we make decisions, but how we make bad decisions. And, if we kind of go back into my life story and why I chase this thing is because I've made some dumb decisions. Like, why did I do that? Why did I not challenge myself? Why did I not push myself a little bit further? And one of the fun things now is I'm a parent, and we're talking about this. I'm a girl dad. I have a 5-year-old girl who's an absolute dream and nightmare at the same time. You'll know what I'm talking about if you've got a little girl. And I'm now stuck in that situation where I want to be an amazing parent and provide for her and care for her and protect her because I'm her dad. And at the same time, I also know that I need to challenge her and let her fall over and expose her to the world and let her figure herself out. And if I don't do that, then I'm going to coddle her and she's not going to develop strengths that she's going to need for the future. So all that to say is it doesn't matter how long you study this psychology stuff, you never quite figure it all out, but you are able to look back and kind of piece some of the pieces together. And so hopefully now at 45 years old, I've got a decent idea of how not to mess up for the future. And, if I take care of myself physically and mentally, then I'll get to practice some of these principles for a very long time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You talk about we never really get perfect at it, but what does education give us? And this isn't a slight at anybody that doesn't, because I know some people that are super intelligent, super important businesses. They're leaders in their industry, they're leaders in their community, and some of them are average wealth, some of them are super wealthy, and they never went for liquor school. But I know
Yeah.
for me, I went through school a couple different times for computer engineering, then electronics engineering, and I literally it taught me a lot. It taught me that I had the ability to learn. Like really at the end of the day, when somebody comes out of school with a diploma or a degree, wherever you live, whatever they give you, that piece of paper that Dan mentioned, it's telling you that you are enough. Maybe you
Yeah.
continue to go back to school, like you mentioned, because we have that imposter syndrome where we don't think we're good enough. We all suffer from that. But school gives many people a leg up, right? It
Yeah.
gives us an ability to circumvent our comfort zone, to take us outside of it, and to be that camp person our whole life. So kudos to you for realizing that. And even today, even some of the things we talked about in the pre-conversation, you literally are a person that is tenacious. And my listeners have heard me talk about this before. Tenacity is a good thing. To me, tenacity is a superpower. To always want more is not a bad thing. Now, what you want more of can be a bad thing, but to
Yeah.
want more knowledge, to aspire to connect is a great thing. So good for you.
Yeah. I think wanting more is never a bad thing. Wanting more than is often a bad thing. And it's the comparison. If you
The
want more for
compromise.
yourself, yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah, the
it's
comparison
comparison.
part of me. Yeah, the
Yeah. So
comparison. That's what I meant to say.
if I want to
Sorry.
be smarter
Yeah.
than Dwight or richer than Dwight
Yeah.
or better looking than Dwight, none of the above are ever going to be possible, but you never know.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was honestly thinking, I think you've got that already, man. Look at you. Go to
Uh,
YouTube, people.
Uh, I'm going to blush. I'm already rosy on this. It's warm in here. But yeah, it's that comparison thing. Is we should never do it for other people or to, compare to other people. But if we want to challenge ourselves, like you said, wisdom. For us to be clever or smarter, as long as we're not doing it for a reason because we're not enough, we feel inferior. You mentioned imposter syndrome. We can talk about that today. Um, we often kind of set these barriers that we think we've got to overcome, and then we overcome it, and then it's like, oh, look, there's another barrier, and it stops us
We
from
can
taking action.
we can talk about that right
Yeah,
now. It doesn't have to be so structured. In a
yeah,
conversation, things come up and we decide to talk about it. Let's talk
yeah.
about imposter syndrome then.
Well, let's do it. So I think there's two types of imposter syndrome. I think there's that one that I just kind of highlighted there, which is I don't feel good enough. It's a lot of people who go into academics. And in fact, the original studies on imposter syndrome were done, I think it was in the 50s or something, with women who were going to get PhDs. And there is kind of very early on where women were going that far in academia. And they'd ask them at the end, how do you feel? And they're like, well, I don't feel, I feel I was lucky. And they would justify their accomplishments. And then, the males would not justify their accomplishments. So there was this very clear difference in perception. Um, and women at that time feeling that they weren't good enough, even though they had a piece of paper. And so it's a pure psychological thing, right? And now I think the studies show us about 70% of people experience that on occasion. It's like, I'm not good enough. I'm going to get found out. Somebody's going to, know that I'm a fraud, or they get promoted. And it's like, oh, can I do this role? And they'll kind of play down their own abilities or shrink, and they'll not do the things. And actually, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We don't do the things that we know we can't do because we feel like we don't have permission. So there's that kind of inferiority complex element from a imposter syndrome. The other one that I think is really prevalent, which is probably more of the stuff that I do, is whenever we set a big goal. If I challenge myself, let's take the bodybuilding thing for example. So last year I came second at Mr. Olympia on a natural stage, which is, I'd say, pretty good. One more step to go, and we'll try and do that this year. But when I started bodybuilding, before I did my first show, I was telling people I'm going to be a bodybuilder, or I am a bodybuilder. I was trying to do the Muhammad Ali thing. I told people I was the greatest in the world before I even stepped in a ring. It's that kind of idea. You got to fake it until you make it. And there were times where I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. But then there were times where I didn't have any reference point. I've never competed as a bodybuilder, and yet I'm trying to be a bodybuilder. And we have these two identities. There's our current identity, who we are right now. We know if we look in the mirror, we see the person who's reflected every single day, who's a result of all of the decisions we've made. That person is our comfort zone. We know that person. Whether we like them or not is another factor. But then typically, if we set a big goal, we have this different identity. We don't have reference for that. We haven't ever achieved that. We don't feel certain it's going to happen. We have no certainty that that will ever play out. And so there's this gap in personal identity and self-identity. And there's a lot of work done around identity and how we view ourselves. And it's that gap which is the biggest imposter syndrome. And so I'll try something, or let's say I'll start bodybuilding, and within 3 weeks of working out, I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'll be like, oh, it's not going to work for me. And so I quit. And this is, we're in January 15th, so just past Quitter's Day, resolutions dropping left, right, and center, because people don't believe, not in the opportunity, but they don't believe in their own ability to get there. And we typically set unrealistic timeframes, or we don't put in the work, or something along those lines. And I remember in those days when I was trying to be a bodybuilder for the very first time, before having ever done a show, I would go and I'd do the things that bodybuilders do, right? I'd go down, weigh myself on the scales, look in the mirror, take photos, send them to my coach of me in the gym, and with my top off, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get there. I'm feeling like a fraud and like a fake, and like, how dare you say you're a bodybuilder? How dare you say that? And yet, if I just keep going, and you talked about tenacity there, if I just keep going, have the discipline to show up, show up, show up, it's going to happen. Like it's inevitable. It can't not happen if I follow the path and the process. And I think that's the biggest thing is until you get there, you don't have that certainty that it can happen. And so for me, as you mentioned, I'm an author. So I have 2 books now. I'm writing a third one, and I still have that. I'm like, Dan, you're not a very good writer. It's like, this writing you do is terrible. I'm like, okay, well, I'm still a writer. I'm still going to write. I have to tell myself that in my head, because that voice is, I've tried. I don't think it's ever going to shut up. It's always going to come in, and it always knows your deepest, darkest fears.
Oh my
It can
gosh.
go straight to the point, and it'll say, Dan, do you remember this time where you were useless? It's like, yeah. It's like this. Just throws it in your face. And this is where we talk a lot about emotion or motivation and stuff like that, especially in fitness side, is I don't feel motivated most of the days. If I relied on motivation to go to the gym, I'd go a couple of days a week, maybe.
Oh my gosh, we have to push past it. And
Yeah.
it's again, I like how you put though. I just want to you can continue on, but we don't
Yeah.
have a reference to that. And I had a guest on here in the last few months who talked about really at the end of the day, most of us don't have a frame of reference for what we see or hear. We automatically make snap judgments based on our limited knowledge or those that are around us that are going, well, that, blah, blah, blah. They're getting upset. And we just have a lot of bias toward the knowledge of others when really they don't have knowledge. They're just piping off because they don't like where their life's at. So let's make it about everybody else's life. So
Yeah.
I like that you talked to reference to that and just at the end of the day, we really having confirmation from others that we're right or wrong when really at the end of the day we got to please ourselves. And how many of us really know how to do that because of imposter syndrome and even know what imposter syndrome is? They don't even know
Yeah.
what the definition of it is. And if you mention it to them, they'll nod their head or go, they like a deer caught in headlights. So it's important that we
Yeah.
discuss things like this and give the two different sides of it. I like how you differentiated that, so I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Anything
It
else you
comes
want to
up
add
it
about
comes
that?
up at the strangest time as well. So at the beginning of the journey, I was definitely there. And there was a moment, I remember this very clearly, where I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror and didn't recognize myself. That was a turning point for me. I kind of was like, oh, who's that? And I was like, whoa, it's me. And suddenly the work shows. But I'd say it was about 90%, 80 to 90% of down the journey. It's not 50%, it's not halfway, which would be nice, right? It's the first half, it's hard. Second half, hey, it's easy. It's nice. It's closer to the end. It's annoying. This is how the world is
But when is
organized, I
the
suppose.
end, though?
Well, you just never know, right? But on this occasion,
That's
from a bodybuilding perspective, it was like, okay, I'm nearly there. I'm nearly there. Just one more little push, which was fun. But then going onto stage, and for the Olympia, we went to Vegas. We're in the Golden Nugget Hotel, and you're backstage, and there's a ton of athletes, and you're looking around, and you're like, oh my God, there's some incredible athletes here. There's one guy on stage, I follow him on Instagram. He has like hundred thousands of followers. I'm like, oh my God, how is this guy here? Like, what? This is not fair. This kind of thing. And you look, the other thing as well, because there's different categories and ages and weight classes and stuff like that, just from a simplicity perspective. So as you're backstage and you're kind of warming up and trying to pump up, you're looking around and you're trying to figure out who am I going to compete against? If it's that guy, I can beat that person. If it's that person, I can beat that person. And so I'm like, okay, well, I have no idea. I went into this thing completely blind. And then they're like, right, this group, up you come. Suddenly, you're going on stage. And there was six of us in this final who qualified. And I remember standing in line, and I must have been like fifth in line. So I saw one person behind me, and I could see all the people in front of me. I felt like just a dwarf. I felt like I was surrounded by giants. And immediately, like my heart was like, boom, 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 boom. Like, and I could feel this imposter syndrome. You don't deserve to be here, Dan. What are you doing? How are you going to go on stage? You're going to get laughed at. All of these things, like immediately coming in, and it's like, nope, I deserve to be here. I've done the work. Like I wouldn't be allowed to be on stage if I hadn't done that work. You deserve to be here. And then as the kind of element calms down, you can be a bit more objective and you can look and go, okay, well, I see that. Here's an opportunity. Here's what I can do. And you come back in control. But yeah, it requires just a moment, just a breath. Okay, thank you, inner voice. Just go over there. Let me get on with my work. But so many people allow that inner voice just to knock them off track. It's like, the sales is a classic one as well. Like salespeople, can you pick up the phone and call somebody? Or what if they don't answer? And what if they hang up on me? What if they swear at me? What if they don't like me? What if they don't want to call? What is it? It's like, okay, you've just spent half an hour not picking up the phone. You could have just picked up the phone and found out. But imagine doing that 5, 10, 100 times a day for the rest
oh,
of your life.
I don't know for the rest of my life. I've done the phone. Well, I'm in the finance industry. I'm a financial planner. So the first
Yeah.
few years I picked up the phone a lot. And that uncomfortableness, I don't honestly know if it ever goes away. I think we can quell it, we can squash it down, we can make that call, but those initial first few seconds, I can feel myself holding my breath sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? It's like,
Yeah. What if
are
they
they going to
reject me?
answer? Are they going to answer? What happens if they
Yeah.
reject me? Right?
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden the conversation goes on, and and really at the end of the day, it's either yes or no.
Yeah.
There's no maybes. There's no in betweens. It's either yes or no. People that say to me, well, maybe, let me think about it, I automatically put them in the no pile.
Yeah.
Just through experience, right? And
Yeah.
it's not negative to anybody. It's just a reality of learning human behavior, and especially you understanding psychology, understanding what
Yeah.
you expect, and having that in here in your brain and your heart, and go, this is what I expect. Okay, it's outside of there. Flush it. I didn't get what I needed. That knows closer to my next yes. And
Yeah.
just one, and I
Yeah.
had to constantly remind myself that. But even today, 22 years into my industry
Yeah.
of financial planning and lifestyle coaching, I don't like picking up and doing a cold call, even if it's a referral.
Yeah. Well,
It's just, I get that little
here's the
bit of
thing. Yeah.
nervous energy, that nervous
Let's
energy.
let's talk about maybe, because maybe is one of my favorite words. In
Sweet.
that I hate it so much. Because it's a pointless word, especially from a decision
It
perspective.
is. It is.
Salespeople, and if you're listening, salespeople, I'm talking to you. Your job is to make somebody make a decision. Everybody else out there, you guys need to make a decision. And maybe as one of those, it's a word of weakness, not like anything bad. It's not a bad weakness, but it's a lack of commitment. You haven't made a decision either way. And salespeople, your job is purely just to get someone to make a decision. Don't be attached to the outcome. Whether they decide to go yes or no is not up to you. It's, if you educate effectively and tie everything into their benefits, then hopefully it'll go your way if you've done it effectively and sold ethically. But your job isn't to get a yes or no. Your job is to make them make a decision, push them off the fence. And one of the questions, and maybe this would be useful, is for you is one of the best questions I like to ask to get people off that fence. And you have to do it with ideally an English accent and a tiny little smile, cheeky smile on your face. Is you say, okay, well, and this you'll see why. It's like, okay, well, how long have you been thinking about this?
It's simple.
Because it's like you call me up. It's like, oh, okay, Dan, I see you're interested in having a financial planner. Would you like to have one? Well, maybe. It's okay. Well, how long have you been thinking about this? And then how much longer do you want to think about it? Because all that thinking you've done up until now hasn't made the difference. I just want you to say yes or no, and like get clear in your head and then move on to your own next problem. Like if you want a financial planner, great. If you don't, great. Then do something else. But stop entertaining this as an option. Stop entertaining this as an option. Not for me. I don't care. Like I've got a pipeline. I'm fine. I'm going to eat. No, kids will be okay. But for you, because we waste so much energy not making decisions. Like we think about things, we ruminate. We're like, oh, what if I do this? What if I do that? And then we're exhausted. And then we actually never graduate our problems. Or we'll think we'll make a decision and we'll go back around in a circle. And so one of the reasons why I study decision science is how can we quicker or more quickly get to a yes or no, either for other people when we're communicating with them, like if we're coaching somebody, so is this an option, yes or no? Okay, we'll eliminate it. And also for ourselves, so we don't keep going around in patterns and we can hopefully break those patterns um, and move on to a bigger, better problem.
Yeah, it really is though. It's like you talk about how long have you been thinking about that? I know in my career I may not use those words, it's very simple, but I do go through that process and I goal set with people. I'm very much into goal setting before we get and conversation, getting down to the meat and what's their life monsters, their money
Yeah,
monsters. And so that when the reason I ask this stuff is to have that connection so that when they falter, I can actually challenge. Well, remember on your goal sheet, this was,
yeah,
when did your decision to want that change since we
yeah,
last talked?
yeah,
A good questions are hard to come by sometimes because
yeah,
every good question that might be a good question for you might not be a good question for that person because of
yeah,
personality. At least that's what I found. So I have to be able to pivot on in the moment based on personality.
yeah,
Client A might be different than client AB, husband and
yeah,
wife. That's individual. The business person is going to need different hand holding initially, or
yeah,
a reminder of their passion or
yeah,
why they wanted what they wanted, because sometimes they've got that external societal noise, which is family, friends, news, whatever. And all of a sudden they're feeling a little bit, not connected.
yeah,
So then they need that push. They need that push from somebody that is not what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody that's outside of their circumstances that is truly invested in listening to them,
yeah,
not judging them. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah, 100%. We want to be empathetic. Like it's like that empathy. It's like, look, I don't, whether you make a decision or not, I don't mind. Like, but I want the best for you. Like, just go
Oh,
and do what you need to do.
I
There's not a lot
love
of people
that.
like that, especially with salespeople.
Well,
We are all a little bit self-motivated, and that's not a bad thing. As long as we do it ethically, then I think we're good.
I love that. Empathy is, and sorry for interrupting you. I just smile because I met a lady I was speaking in this a few years, 2, 3 years ago. I was speaking in just outside of Salt Lake City. I can't even remember the community. It's attached right to Salt Lake, and she's an empath coach. And I've
Mm,
had her on my show twice now. And I met her personally, and she took me through an exercise and asked me questions about my children, how do I feel about certain things? And she says, "You're an empath. You score so high on this scale, it's not even funny. This is why you feel this." Like, and we've become
yeah,
really close friends now, right?
awesome.
She's just super nice. She lives in the States, but empathy is so key
Yeah,
and sincerity.
yeah, yeah.
Empathy and sincerity tie toward one another. And I love the fact that you brought that up. We really do need to be more compassionate and have empathy toward other people's circumstances. And the number one person that needs it is ourselves, the person we look at, like you said, in the mirror.
Oh,
It's
always,
hard to have
always.
empathy for
Yeah, it
ourselves.
is.
Like you talked about, a couple of things I wrote down too, but just different things in your life. You talked about the fact that you took pictures and you sent them to your coach.
Yeah,
Can you explain to me, no matter what you're trying to accomplish in life, whether it's your natural bodybuilding, physique bodybuilding, or getting into behavioral sciences, whatever the
yeah.
case may be, you talked about sending stuff to a coach. How do you feel a coach and mentor is important? They may not necessarily berate you or tell you, but how important is it for us to communicate with others what we're trying to achieve?
So my coach is also my brother, actually, from a bodybuilding perspective. He competed for a long time, and he's been invaluable in getting me to this point. So if you're right there, oh, brother, thanks. He knows, he knows. Um,
Hopefully he listens. You can
yeah,
send him the link.
but we're also brothers, so I'm going to send him as much abuse as I do love, and that's
Sweet.
how
I
siblings do it,
love
right?
it. That's good.
But I think there was a few things. There was a few things that were really beneficial. Number one is the accountability perspective is I've got to show up. I've got to do this thing, whether I like it or not. I've got to send it to him. I've got to get outside of my own, like, oh, this is stupid. Like, don't do it. Just get it done. Like, you've got to do this thing. Like standing in front of a mirror, like setting up a phone on a tripod or something like that, or leaning against your water bottle and trying to take photos of you trying to look great when you don't look great. And, it's that kind of thing. It's all good. But you do it because it's a check-in and it allows you both to see progress and compare where you were at last competition to current competition. And you've got all these different data points that you can have later on. You can do it not just through photos, but kind of weighing scales. Like I would step on scales every day, send in my weight, those kind of things, especially close to competition time. So we know we're on track and we know we're making progress. That's the other thing as well I think it's the Hawthorne effect is what gets measured gets done. Um, so if you have a metric, if there's a specific metric you're working on, typically that will improve. And so, working with a coach, it keeps you focused on the main things. So for me, it was weight, body composition, all those things, and like conditioning around from a visual perspective. The thing that was really useful, this is probably the most useful thing, is objectivity. And I think I mentioned this a second ago, but objectivity versus subjectivity. So when I look at my photos, I look at it and I see this, I see what I see in the mirror, or I don't actually. That's really annoying because I look okay in the mirror and then I take a photo. I'm like, oh, is that what I really look like? Oh, and then I start getting really critical. Like you said, we have to be more self-empathetic or self-compassionate, but we're not. It's like, oh, that looks terrible. And, somebody does that pose better. And, you're not flexing there. And, you need to try it. There's so many of these things. I'm not going to be ready. This isn't going to work. And like panic sets in. And I'll send the text to my brother. He's like, yeah, look good, you're in the right place. And that was all he needed to say. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And if
Simple
somebody else,
words
yeah,
can just accelerate our confidence in ourselves,
yeah.
right?
And it was literally just that. It's like, okay, we're on track. Remember, there's a path. I've still got X amount of weeks or whatever it is. We don't have to rush. You don't have to be there tomorrow. Like, let the process work. And just sometimes having somebody who's invested in your goal, like they're genuinely, invested in your success, but they can be a bit more outside and not kind of so panicky is really useful. So that was what from me was uh, just one of the most important things, especially as if you know anything about bodybuilding, close to the end, you're dieting hard, you don't have a lot of energy, you're tired, your hormones are all over the place, even as men. So you get miserable, you get grumpy, you get ratty, you get snappy, you get all of these things, and you panic, and like sleeps down, all of these things. It's not a healthy place to be for like 2 minutes on stage where you try and look as good as you can, then you go and have a burger. We do
Nice
what we do,
cheeseburger.
right?
Cheeseburger.
Exactly. So, and during those times where you're at your most, I say, emotionally vulnerable point, to have somebody there who says everything's going to be okay is just I can't tell you how useful that is.
That's awesome. We're gonna jump into because we're gonna run out of time. Most
Yeah.
likely gonna have to have you on again if you're up for that because
Oh, I'd
there's
be up.
so many things I'd love to discuss. I was looking at it last night when I was putting together the flow of my podcast, and the people that are not new to the show know I take it very serious. I end up with always way more than I have time
Yeah,
for, and some people I don't care. And it doesn't mean because there aren't good guests, they just it doesn't need to, but you're a fascinating man, dude. Just to be honest with you. So
thanks, buddy.
one of the things, you're welcome. I wanted to get into the psychology. Like psychology is such a vast field, right? I know to
Yeah,
specialize in a niche, no matter what we do, it's important to truly make a difference by establishing ourselves as not being the master of everything, right? Because then we really are not really helping out. What made you decide um, to specialize in behavioral psychology. And can you explain how it differs from other psychological disciplines?
yeah, yeah. So, like I said, I started teaching salespeople neuro-linguistic programming. And neuro-linguistic programming, I'd say pseudoscience. It's got a lot of great tools and techniques, but it isn't scientifically verified by the academic community. A lot of it comes down to the therapist or the practitioner, whoever's using the tools. It's their ability to choose the right tool, technique at the time, communicate effectively, build rapport. So a lot of it is down to the individual as opposed to the the science. And so part of me was like, okay, well, it's still useful as an influencer, as someone, a salesperson. I want to be able to use these tools, but I also need to understand on the other side what's going on in that person's head. So when I'm trying to convince you, Dwight, to do something, what's going on in your head? Because if I understand that and how the cogs are turning and all of those elements, then I can be more effective as a communicator. Say, okay, well, you're probably thinking this now, or this is probably a concern for you. All right, great. And if you can be one step ahead, it seems like you've been there before. People buy from confidence, like as a confidence element. So, okay, well, it sounds like he's been there before. All right, yeah, it must be good at this. I'm more likely to make a positive decision. So that was my original um, motivation for studying this thing, to become a better sales trainer. What I've since learned is that I'm actually less interested in the sales application and more interested in the personal application. So this is where I've kind of been turning my attention. And the biggest thing that I took from that, and as a sales trainer, it's the same thing, is I hate the status quo. Like the status quo, how we do things all the time is one of my biggest bugbears because we don't change. And you talked about camping out. I use the term stuck. A lot of people get to a point where they're stuck, especially men at my age, and women as well. But I do a lot of work with men. Is we get to a point where we wake up and we're like, where am I? Like, I'm not in a life that I thought I was going to be living. Whose life is this? Like, I'm not happy. And this is what kicked off my bodybuilding journey. Is I realized that I saw a photo of myself, and that I saw a guy who said a lot of stuff, but wasn't living a lot of stuff. And, I had an average career, a very average physique, and I was living a very comfortable place, but it wasn't satisfying. I was dissatisfied. There was a whole bunch of things that I wasn't happy with. And I'm like, well, how did I get stuck? Why did I get stuck? And if we look at that and we use all of these elements from psychology and this behavioral psychology and decision psychology, and this is what my book this year is going to be about, called Unstuck. There's like 7 principles from behavioral psychology that we can really pinpoint to this. And some of them are actual models. And you talked about the academic thing. Yeah, understanding the models of why we get stuck is really useful because we can then pull different levers. And some of them are other challenges that are kind of in other areas of life, but are super applicable to how we make decisions and why we get stuck. So let me run you through a few of them. So here's a
Sure.
classic. So I recently moved to New York. Right? This is important because it's about walking. Now, in New York, you walk everywhere. Like I've gone through at least two pairs of shoes, and I've only been here for 5 months. But you walk everywhere. The weather's been good as well. Lately, a bit cold, but generally pretty dry. So the question is, if I've got to go 10 blocks, how do I get there? Well, the easy answer is walk. Oh, it's a nice sunny day. I'll walk 10 blocks. It's maybe 10 minutes, depending on which direction the blocks are. If I've got to go 50 blocks, how do I get there? At some point, like let's say it's 100 blocks or something like that, I will change. I will either take the bus or train. Okay. And so what we're going to understand is between 10 blocks and 100 blocks, let's do it like that, just for easy maths. There is a point of crossover, which we call this kind of region beta, where I will change from walking to motorized transport because it's inefficient. It's inefficient, right? It's faster or easier or more convenient to go by bus or by metro than it is to walk. So the question is, what is that point? Like for some people, it'll be, okay, well, I could do 20 blocks. Oh, maybe it's 30 blocks. Oh, it's a sunny day. Maybe I'll do I'll do 35 blocks. Oh, I don't mind. Or it's rainy. So we change it. So this principle is actually sliding. It's a completely psychological sliding scale. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about walking blocks in New York. But let's take it to a different application. So let's say, Dwight, you have a terrible job. You hate your job. And this is your job. And you're stuck in this job. And at some point, if things were bad enough, you would change your job. You would go and find another job. You would leave your job. My question to you is, at what point on that sliding scale do you change your job? And what we're really good at as human beings is moving that according to how we want to feel. And I'd say, oh, I hate my boss. I hate this. It's terrible. I'm going to quit tomorrow. Have a conversation with my buddy. It's like, yeah, you should definitely quit. Oh, did you hear about Dave? Oh, no. What happened with Dave? Oh, Dave got fired. Dave doesn't even have a job. And it's terrible. And now suddenly
Conflicting.
it moves, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I should be grateful. I even have a job. It might not be great, but at least I've got a job. So we move the barrier and we move the point where we change. And this is it's called the region beta paradox, is this crazy idea that we're able to move an inflection point. And you talked about coming from the kind of the school of life as opposed to academics. Our grandparents knew all this stuff. Well, my grandparents were like, better the devil you know. Remember that? Remember that phrase? Better the devil
Oh,
you know.
absolutely. Heard it all
It's
the
the same
time.
thing, right? So it's encouraging us to stay stuck. And so, what we've got to understand is this is a purely hypothetical thing. So at what point does it become bad enough to change a job? At what point does it become bad enough to leave that relationship? At what point does it become bad enough that you quit drinking or smoking or doing drugs or whatever it is? At what point does that change? And we can manipulate that. We can say today, actually, I've had enough. Like this is it.
Well,
Now it's
to
too much.
manipulate it can involve friends, your
Yeah.
your your associations. And associations, like I tell people, just aren't friends. What are you listening to? What do you read?
Yeah.
What events do you attend? What groups do you belong to? And I have those conversations, and people go, "Why?" Oh, and then all of a sudden, some of them, you get this light bulb effect right away,
Yep.
and they're like, "Oh, I searched out the type of life that I thought I had to live. I searched out the same type of people. So all of a sudden now you have that bias or that, well, you should quit your job. Yes, you should quit your job. And the
Yeah.
person that you talked about that had somebody say they just lost their job, and the other person said, "Oh, quit your job." Now all of a sudden you're going, oh,
Yeah.
what do I do?
And I tell you what's funny, this thing, and if you're listening, is I'm holding up my mobile phone. But if I sit here and I say, I want to quit my job, 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 I say it enough times, it's not listening. Obviously, it's not listening. But if I go onto Instagram in a little while, how many posts do you think there will be on there that say, hey, you interested in quitting your job? These are the 5 reasons you should quit your job. And we get this, the other one we've got is this confirmation bias, is that the information that's coming to us reinforces the things that we think already. And so rarely do we ever get this kind of contrasting opinion. So yeah, this is one of the things that is in psychology is a really interesting thing, is we'll look for opportunities that reinforce our beliefs as opposed to opportunities to conflict it. And so it's called confirmation bias. We seek out these things that make us feel good about what we believe. And we should really change that. We should, if we're going to make good decisions, you don't want, hey, Dwight, I'm thinking about this. Dan, that's a great idea. Like if everybody I say, this is, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. I should be worried. I should be worried. I want someone to ask me questions. I want to say, well, why do you think that? Like, have you thought about this? Like, surely this is not a great idea. You know, what about this contingency? Like, I want to have that conversation. I need to have somebody to give me that perspective so I can make a better decision. I don't need to be panicked or postpone a decision.
Well, it
But if,
diffuses situations if you do it
yeah,
correctly. It really
yeah,
does. It diffuses any situation where I have people that are upset and they're not necessarily upset at me and they'll say blah 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 blah. What do you
yeah,
think?
yeah,
I will pause for a second and I'll say to them just a second and sometimes it can be instantaneous. I'll pause and I'll
yeah,
think about it and I'll give them two sides of the coin and they'll go, "What do you mean? What are you doing?" Well, I agree with what you say here. Here's some good. But have you thought about this? Because I'm always trying to make their thought process not be conflicting, but be educated for them to think, oh, I never thought about that option. I
yeah,
never thought about that I can accomplish that. Or really, you think I have that in me?
yeah,
Because I'm somebody that sees them for the forest for the trees, like the phrase.
yeah. So confirmation bias is a big one. I'll give you a couple more.
Yeah.
These are fun. So we talked about conformity bias is another one. Is that we don't make our own decisions, we allow other people to make our decisions. So I think the classic example I told you about my mum sitting down and crying and saying you should do maths. I am appreciated now. I think the numerical awareness has been super useful. So don't tell her if she listens to this. Thank you, mum. Um, but
Okay,
you
mom,
know,
ignore
at the
that.
time, I realized that I was being emotionally blackmailed, but it's all good. But as we often do the things that people expect us to do. Oh, you know, you're going to go to school, you're going to get a good job, you're going to do these things, and we take the traditional path. And actually, many of us aren't up for that. You know, my nephew at the moment, he's 18, he just turned 18, and he's trying to become a plumber. He didn't want to go to academic. He doesn't like school. He doesn't like studying too much. He wants to kind of go into business, but it's funny listening to people conversation like where they're trying to guide him. It's like, well, try this, right? Why do you try this? It's all very traditional. It's like, well, I don't like that. And we try and guide, and we're like, no, but this is the path. We've been educated. This is where you go to school. You do this, and it's like, and if you don't go on that path, I don't know how to like what is going on. And and yet the future, like for my daughter, it's not going to be that. Like she's not going to be employed for her skills. Skills are going to change so fast that after school it's going to be no, it's not about that. It's about attitude. It's about application. It's about capability. It's about softer skills, transferable skills. Those are things that people need to be able to learn. So it's going to be interesting to do that. But a lot of people make decisions because they think that's what other people expect them to do. And then
Yeah,
you make them, and it's not what makes you happy, and it's not what makes you come alive, and it's not the decision you would make, but you do it because you think other people want you to.
oh, and that's that hamster wheel effect. That's that learned behavior effect where, like my father owned a business and he really wanted me to take it over, but
Yeah.
it wasn't what I wanted, and it caused some conflict, some strife, and I
Hmm.
never did take it over. I could have
Yeah.
been way more, in some ways, based on his level of definition of success, I would have been way
Yep.
more successful doing that than maybe what I'm doing now. I don't know. We don't talk about it. I've
Yeah.
gone on my own journey. He's proud of me for what I do now. My mom and him,
Good.
they're still alive in their 80s. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, really, we need to help society, one person at a time, group at a time, just be able to believe that they can accomplish anything and find the right person, like you would
Yeah.
get that simple message from your brother, from another
Yeah.
mother, or whatever. Maybe it is your actual brother, and you message, and they just say,
Yeah.
good, keep on going.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
Exactly.
awesome, because we
Yeah.
have to have people in our life that we respect and
Yeah.
believe that they have the knowledge that we aspire to gain or
Exactly.
and help us through those decisions. Now,
Yeah.
if you're getting decisions from people that are always saying, "Well, I want to quit my job." Okay, quit.
Yeah.
I want to get a promotion. Okay, get one. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
always just parroting what we say. It's look for new
Yeah.
people.
You did different opinions. Here's the last one
Yes.
I'll leave you because I know we're running out of
Okay.
time, but I really want to
Yes,
share
we
this one
are.
with you.
Go for it.
Is this is called the trolley problem. You may have heard of this, but this is a psychological problem. So think about AI driving cars now, right? This is happening. So cars are making these decisions, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay, so we're standing by a train track, and there's a runaway train coming down the track. Okay, if it carries on down the track, there's five people lying down on the track. They're going to get squished. Absolutely going to get squished. If you're by a lever, and if you pull this lever, it will divert the train down another track where there's only one person. Okay. The question is, do you pull the lever? Do you pull the lever to divert the train to avoid five people, but guaranteed to kill one person? Would you pull that lever?
Well, I believe in the needs of many over the needs of the one. I'd pull the lever
Cool. So there we go.
to
So
be
that's the
up to.
utilitarian view, is that we should always make the decision for the greater good. And the greater good is, sorry, one person, you're going to get sacrificed. Five people over here. It's
But it
better.
would be
It's a
nice to know
better
the
decision.
story of the one person, though. Now, if
And
I knew
that's the
the
thing. And
story
now
of
we don't
and
know.
they're
Yeah.
and they were a future Nobel Peace winner for the cure for
Oh, okay.
cancer, then now
Yeah.
all of a sudden I might not pull the lever because the
Yeah.
other five, not that their lives are inconsequential, that one person might save millions. The other
Yeah.
people work at a menial job, and not that their menial
Yeah.
job isn't important.
Yeah.
Their value to society. So information
Exactly. There you
is
go. So it
king.
could be five old people, one young person. It could be a millionaire. It could be pregnant people. It could be
But my knee-jerk response would be to pull it.
five, right, five dogs, one cat. It's like it's all you can play around. There's actually a really funny one. I'll show you the link afterwards, but you can play around with so many different variables. But the question isn't necessarily that, because there's a pause, and one of the pauses is, okay, but I might be saving five, but I'm proactively killing one. And that's, have you ever been in a situation where it feels like it doesn't matter what decision you make, it's the wrong one? Like eventually we let go of taking
The
control,
lesser
right?
of two evils,
Yeah.
right? The
And
least
so
slimiest choice.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
even though, and you're right, from a utilitarian person, like we should pull the lever, we don't, because we know that we'll get into trouble for that, or that we'll be blamed for that. And actually, I don't know the story for those five. Why there were even five people only down on track? I don't know enough about this. I'm not going to make a decision. I'm out. And how many people live life like that, where they're passive in the decision making? And in psychology, we call it locus of control, right? It's okay, well, things are going to happen to me. It's fate. It's just how the world is. I'm not going to make a decision. Things will happen, right? Versus, okay, actually, I'm going to take control of this and I'm going to do something. And whether it's right or wrong isn't the matter. It's like I'm going to drive. And one of the things that people get stuck is they let go of the wheel. They're not prepared to make decisions because they've been burned so many times in making the wrong decision or being scolded for making a decision. It's like, well, why did you do that? You have to justify yourself. It's like, no. And so luckily with locus of control, it's very contextual. And this is why fitness is such a great start for people who are stuck. Taking control of your fitness doesn't require other people. You can just do it. You can go to the gym, you can eat the right food, you can do so many things that are without other people being involved and influencing. So that's why it's a great place to start from a transformation perspective. And as we scale up and we say, okay, well, I want to take a little bit more control of other areas, then we have to interact with people. But it's about pulling the lever. It's about knowing when to pull the lever and not making a decision. Again, we come back to that point. It's not maybe. It's like I will either pull it or not pull it. I will not abstain from making a decision.
Yeah.
So that's the
For
trolley
actually
problem.
moving
Yeah,
forward. Yeah.
yeah,
So because we are running out of time, I know you have another appointment coming up. One of the things we're going to touch on briefly now, we don't have a lot of time, is, you've written a couple books and you're on your third, one on LLP and another one released last year called The Personal Transformation Blueprint: How to
yeah,
Create Powerful, Unprecedented, and Lasting Change in Your Life. I myself wrote a book. It was very cathartic, right? Really
yeah,
helped me out. I haven't written two like you and on the third, but it helped me realize both a lot of things about myself, both to pat myself in the back and also kick myself in the pants moments as I was
yeah,
writing it, especially
yeah.
rereading it and changing chapters and stuff as my editor was going through it. What was it like writing your books? And did writing them help you continue to move forward in your life?
100%. I wrote it as I was going through it. So my personal transformation was my fitness goal and becoming like runner-up at Mr. Olympia. Next year we'll talk about it. I'll be Mr. Olympia. But until then, I'll just say runner-up. But it was great. It was, so again, as you go through these challenges, you're looking for answers. Like as I'm going through this kind of imposter syndrome, I'm like, what? Why am I feeling this way? And now I have tools and resources. I can go and say, okay, well, let me go and study this. Let me understand it. And so the book, Personal Transformation, is about how do we make these challenges and how do we make these changes, and why don't people make these changes? So if they try and change it, why doesn't it work? So it combines like the practical advice that I've gone through from my own stuff with a lot of psychology related to behavior change, and a lot of the theoretical models that help people understand why behaviors change or not change. And you talked about social proof. There's a lot about our social norms is a big element. It's like one of the three main elements about whether we change our behavior or not. It's like our social norms will impact our intentions to change, and then we'll follow through or not. And that's largely down to self-esteem. So it was really cathartic. It was like, okay, well, how am I visualizing myself? Like, how am I making that, setting that goal? Because, I've done goal setting, but what's going to be different this time? Okay, this is different. All right, now I've got this imposter syndrome. How do I go through it? Okay, I need to develop mental toughness. I need to develop discipline. I need to think about things in a different way. I need to quiet those voices in my head, or at least get them to say different things. How do I do that? And then I'm like, okay, well, how do I make this easier? And then historically, I've always tried to find the shortcut is there's no shortcut, man. There's no shortcut. And we gotta change our relationship with work. We've got to be prepared to work hard and then work smart. And this is it. It's like so the first thing is the grind. You've got to go and put in the work. You can outsource some things, but unless you know what you're outsourcing, it's always going to go wrong. And that's so you've got to go through the process first and understand it extremely well, and then you can outsource it as a system. I think there's a great book called The E-Myth, revisited by Michael Gerber, which I kind of highly recommend to people who are looking to systemize their business. It's a good book, but we've got to do that with our life as well. But the only way you can do that is if you know the process because you've lived the process. So work hard, then work smart, and then it's about changing. The other thing in there is sacrifice. That's a big element to that is sacrifice isn't about goats and virgins. I talk about it's about chess, and it's about how can you give something up to get a strategic advantage. So that it's not about saying no to lots of things. It's about saying a bigger yes to a fewer number of things. And then you can really lean into that. So we can't have everything. We can't have our cake and eat it. And there's a bodybuilding joke in there somewhere. But we can absolutely invest all of our energy into a smaller number of things. And that, if you choose those things right, I think that's what winning is.
Wow, I love that. Man, I wish we had another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to talk. I have got so many things I want to talk to you about. We're definitely going to have you on again. Maybe we'll wait until you are ready to release your book or you've
Yeah.
released it. Reach out to me. But one last thing, we got 3 minutes left here. Dan, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
I'd say challenge your status quo. Like anything that you look at and you say, oh, that's just how we do things around here. That's how we did it yesterday. It's question why. Why do you do it that way? And does it serve you? I think we have a lot of patterns that we bring forward and they were useful in the past, but they're not so useful anymore. And so, like I said earlier, I absolutely passionately detest the status quo. And this is the one thing that keeps us stuck. And if we stay stuck, then our life is going to go past. And my nan always used to say this as the years come past faster and faster. I'm 45, I'm going to blink in a minute. My girl's going to be growing up and leaving home. And I need to be the role model. I need to set the example. And she watches and listens more than she watches more than she listens. And so we all need to live a life of example. And yes, words are great, but live a life of example, challenge your status quo, do the things that are a little bit scary but exciting. And if we can do that on a little bit more of a frequent basis, get outside of our comfort zone, then I think we'll have a life that is far more exciting and that we should all give a heck about.
Right on. Great message. So our time is almost up. I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, what's the best way people can reach out to you?
Come to the website danstorey.com. I have a new newsletter called Pep Talk. It's called Purpose, Energy, and Productivity. It's probably the best thing. So every week I'll send out three little ideas on how can we be more purposeful, how can we be more energetic, and how can we get more out of our lives. And then the other one is on Amazon, Personal Transformation Blueprint, and then Unstuck, working title. But the next one will be out hopefully in the next few months.
Oh, and you also have your podcast people can check out too. Remind the audience what's the name of your podcast?
Personal Transformation Podcast. And Dwight will have you
Right.
on there shortly just to reflip this conversation around because I know you've got a huge amount of insight to bring. So love to have you as a guest.
Oh, I'd love that actually. But yes, please check out for the new listeners or viewers, go to giveaheck.com. Go to the top, hit the podcast. It'll bring up my podcast page. You'll see a picture of Dan, and I'll have all his links for social media, his website. You'll be able to access chapter summaries, and there'll be the complete unedited show notes if you want to go in and look for specific stuff, because I know some people like doing that. So check out giveaheck.com. Any last words before I wrap up the show?
No, I think you've done an amazing job, Dwight. Thanks for having me. And hopefully everybody's found some value in this and they challenge their own beliefs and do things a little bit differently.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna challenge more stuff myself because I love changing and growing. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Dan. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.